Good morning. I wanted to take a little interlude in the garage door project to show some sample code that I wrote on how to read serial data from the sensor. I happened to be talking to the guys out at Maxbotics last night or yesterday, and they asked if I had some VB code, Visual Basic code, that would show reading from the sensor. I didn't, but it's not a big issue to go and write something. So what I've done is gone and written a little sample that just shows you how to open the serial port, how to deal with it, and how to update a list box. So let's have a look at the physical layout again. And here you can see that I have my sensor. It's connected into the system here. You can see I have my lights. All of this is the same as in the previous videos that I've been showing you. What's new is I've added a serial port. Now, my desktop machine doesn't actually have a serial port on it, so I had to go get a USB to serial adapter and use that to get serial data. Now, because I'm just reading a single line, I have to come out and connect a single line to the serial adapter, and so I need a null modem. Now, you can get devices like this that are actually null modem USB serial adapters so that you can just take this data in. I had a standard USB to serial port. So utilizing some male to female jumper leads for my breadboard, I just stuck them onto the pins, and I took together the pins according to the null modem layout, and that enables me to set up things so that the PC will successfully read it, and then I can take the single line in from the sensor into the serial port and read that as data. So what I'm going to go do is utilize the little read sensor item, and we'll just drop it in there, and you can see the doors opened up. So if we go back to my code now, we can see that I'm reading a bunch of information here, and it's coming in on the serial port to the Galileo device. I'm not actually reading a serial on the PC. So let's go over and have a look at the serial demo. This is just a simple Windows Forms application written in Visual Basic, and what I've got is a list box, and I've got a couple of buttons that enable me to open and close the COM port. So if we have a look at the code here, basically when I open a COM port, I'm going to go through a few steps. The first, let me check to see if the COM port is already open. If it is, close it. I want a clean start when I do the open. I'm going to set a bunch of the parameters for the serial connection. 9600 baud, 8 bits, 1 stop bit, no parity. These come from the data sheet, and the sensor will tell you, or whatever you're connecting to will say this is the format. Now, I happen to know that this is coming in on port 3, and I can tell that because if we go to the device manager, I can look at the ports, and you'll see that the serial to COM port is port 3. Now, in a real application, you would actually use the get port names method of the serial port class to say enumerate all of the ports on the system, and then you present that information to the user. The user would select the right port, and that would be the port name. I don't do that here. This is a sample. I know it's COM3. The other thing that I do set is I set the new line character. If you remember when we previously looked at the data coming out of the MB1040, it came out in a format of an R, then 3 numeric digits, and then a carriage return. So that becomes a line, and so I can tell the serial port class that the carriage return is the new line character, and so now I can treat that as a single string, and I will be able to read that in when I do my read line. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a handler to utilize the serial port's data received event. We have an event-driven programming model here, so I can go do that, have my event called, I can have my UI thread go off, do other stuff. When data is present, I'll be called, and I'll be able to handle that. Now, you could sit in a polling loop and do that, but the infrastructure is here. It makes your application much more responsive, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. The last thing I'll do, now that I've all set everything up, is call the open on the serial port class. Now, again, in a real application, you'd put this in a try-catch, because if the open fails, it'll throw an exception. And so you want to look at that exception and handle it appropriately. This is a sample, so I know the port's going to be ready. We can just call COM port open, and off we go. So let's have a look at the handler for when we receive the data. You can see here that I have my handler set up. I have a sender object and event args. Now, I don't use the event args in here, so we can ignore them. But the sender I do use. So the sender is actually the serial port class instance that we created when I clicked on the button. So I can create a reference to that. I cast it correctly to the serial port, and then I can treat it just like I would have as a direct variable. So what I'm going to go do is say, let's read the line to the new line character out of the serial port, and we'll stick that into the received data. Now, what's happening here is that this serial port class has spun up a thread, and that's a separate thread that's working to handle all the serial data. And when I get this event called, I'm actually in the context of that thread. So I can't directly interact with things that are in the UI thread of my Windows form app. So what I need to do is I need to transition from those threads to enable me to do that. And the way I do that is through a delegate that I'm going to create, and I hand it the event handler that I want. I hand it the subroutine that I actually want to be invoked. And you can see here I've created the delegate, and then I'm going to invoke that delegate, which is list update here, with the received data. Now that invoke will transition me to the UI thread and then let me actually interact with the list box appropriately. Now there's some code some links up the top here that show you how to do more things with the invoking of a delegate and so on. So to get a better understanding of what's going on there, go have a read of that documentation, and you can see how easy it is to handle this cross-thread invoke. So now that we have this set up, what I want to do is I want to come back over here to my garage door project, and what I have is I have this sensor connected to a transistor that controls its power supply, because I want to be able to reset the sensor when it's in operation. And Maxbotics recommends that you reset the sensor every 15 minutes. So in my garage door project, I'm going to have a little timer in the background that if the sensor has been running for longer than 15 minutes, it will perform a reset that enables it to do a recalibration and then start reading again. So what I can do is just simply pull that pin out, and that's going to give me the same effect as turning off the power to the sensor. So let's come back here to my sample application, and if we run this, you'll see that I have a list box, and I'm just going to click on the read COM3, and now we're going to start to read data from the COM port. So I'm going to come back to the sensor, and just for a short period of time, I'm just going to turn the power back onto the sensor. It initializes. It's provided some data, and if we come back to the application here, you can see that I've got a bunch of strings that have come out of the sensor, and then I have the reading. So this is that first data set. If you look at my logic analyzer video, you can see where I found that first set of strings there, and then you can see the rest of the actual readings coming in. And so if I was going to deal with this sensor in a real-world application, once I'm finished with the startup information, I would then just simply take that string, and I would be able to throw away the R character, look at the 3 digits, and convert that into a distance, and then be able to work on that. So that's a simple example of how you would get serial data if you were programming in Visual Basic. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll get back to the garage door project proper fairly shortly. Thank you.